space. But really what I plan to do is I'll spend the first part of the session, and it's going to be a little bit quicker, but kind of a general theories about student leadership and student agency. It's kind of a grounding the work that students do and the capabilities that students have to influence their environments within a specific institution or broadly within the higher education system. So I'll give you a bit of a theory, really just for the purposes of kind of telling you what it is that we researchers research when we research student representation or youth involvement, and what are some of the concepts that are out there. Then we'll have a little bit break. In the second part, I am hoping to speak really just about student representation, participation, and governance. We'll give you the models, kind of a background theoretical material, but also want to point out that those are the models that have been developed by me mostly in the past, and that they should be changed and changing, and that you come from because they were developed for the specifically European, partially African space when I was doing them, and the situation A has changed, B, you come from different cultural contexts, so I'm ready for shaking them up, revisiting, disregarding completely, but I'll give you this as a starting point as well for the self-reflection on your own student associations. But my goal really is to kind of, as you see here, give you the student agency, present the models, but also, especially as I said before, draw on your experiences and on your expertise, and enable at least a little bit of a peer-to-peer exchange, you meeting with other people, and enable some reflection, because lots of those things will be familiar to you, maybe just not from the kind of a researcher point of view that I'm coming to you today. And then I'm hoping to motivate you to do this personal action project as well. But we'll talk about it a little bit more later, and I have a little bit of a space for that. Okay, so learning objectives, like every proper master class should be doing, the expected learning outcomes, if you like it, the theories, the different type of associations, especially maybe I would say, so initially student agency leadership, then representative student associations, the key characteristics, models of representation within the institutional and within the national politics. But I also want to speak about autonomy, legitimacy, and change in student representative organizations or within the youth associations. It again, transferable concepts here. And then outline of your personal action project is something that I'm hoping you will have, even if it's just jotted on the piece of paper or in your mind, but I'm hoping that you will kind of define it for yourself for this academy for the next 14 weeks. And now I'm beginning, and this is where now the kind of lecture part starts, and I'll try to make it fairly short enough so that we can have a little bit more of the work. So student leadership and student agency is this first part of the module. While I'm speaking, I welcome questions, comments, reflections. If something pops into your mind, please put it into the chat, okay? Just if there is a question, immediately put it into the chat, because I will, after I do my first part, take a little bit pause and check if there is anything already, okay? So please use the chat for this purpose. I teach a course here at Harvard about student leadership and students in service to higher education. And I usually kind of start off with this definition of what leadership is. And I know that leadership kind of has a different connotation in different cultures. And in some cultures, you don't even use much of a term leader. Like in my country, it's kind of, we are so egalitarian, even the term itself sometimes tends to be uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, regardless of how we call it, when we think about the work that you do in your respective roles, it's really about mobilizing others to change things, or to wanting to struggle together for shared aspirations. This is from Kuznets and Posner's Student Leadership Challenge. Kind of put your attention, give your time for a cause together. And what we also know from the literature on student leadership is that it's not necessarily vested in formal leadership positions. It's not necessarily only in the president's role or the vice president's role or the secretary general's role, but that people can influence and have this kind of a leadership role as well in an informal context. We can do it at home, and I'm exercising, well, I have a certain position, but I'm exercising my leadership often with my children, and so do they against me within your dormitories. So without necessarily a formal authority. It is leadership, it's inevitably about relationships, right? It is about connecting with others. It is about understanding the others. It is about empathizing the experiences of others. It's about engaging with others. And it's not something that one is born with, right? It's not a set of skills that you're born with, but it's something that we all continue to develop. Again, regardless of the roles we are in, but it's something that you can develop, you can nurture, and you can help others develop as well that are part of your movement or your organization. So it's really about serving, right? Leadership is at the end of the day serving, because you're not acting only in self-interest, but you're acting in the interest and the service of other people, or it's in a sense of a public service. It's also about the stewardship of your own student movements, the ideas that are behind your student movements. It's about listening. It's about commitment to everyone's growth, self-development. So everybody within the movement and associations, people should not feel worn out. They should feel they are growing as well personally with the movement in a sense. So this is a little bit on the student leadership. But also, yes, I say here, it's about honesty and transparency, right? It's about sharing honestly and transparently about the agendas, the partners that support that. It is about trust, and it's about empowerment. Empowerment of the movement and association, and about people that are part of it. So this is kind of a basic things. Here are a few things that Kuznets and Posner, who wrote this Student Leadership Challenge for the Americans, so they do the American way with 5 things and things like that. I'm not too fond of it, the kind of commercializing the whole student leadership development in a sense. That's their approach, but there are some of the ideas here, the kind of 5 practices of exemplary leadership that I think that resonate and even resonated with me when I was reading the book. Modeling the way. So your values are shared values, acting on values. So in the way, not expecting of others to do something that you are not willing to do in the same position, inspiring a shared vision, creating this narrative of imaginative possible future for the world that you're trying to influence, or for your association, or for your country, and creating this imagery for the people that you're trying to mobilize. And it doesn't need to be that grand. It can be for the Students' Psychology Association that we have just read. It could be an imaginary future of a quality association, quality education for psychology students. It can be access to this type of education. It can be that very, very kind of pragmatic. It doesn't need to be grand societal vision, but it still has to be a vision, and it still has to be kind of an image that will bring people to your association, that will kind of feel the importance of the goals that you're setting for yourself, and hoping that others share those goals. Then challenging the process is often part of what student leaders do, right? And I'm thinking about UNESCO and our current struggle of UNESCO has its own ways of working with student and youth associations, and has their own structures that they have built for that purpose, and then they added on new structures. but what often student leadership does involve is challenging that, challenging challenging the UNESCO's way of organizing themselves and their work with student youth organizations. And it means looking for the opportunities to get into the structure and change this message, or get a coalition of people who will support you. So this is the struggle part, right? Another point is enabling others to act. And this is again the point that I was mentioning earlier. It's really kind of a validating and affirming the people that are part of your movement, part of your organization, empowering them, enabling them to exercise leadership, developing a sense of trust and collaboration, a kind of a common spirit within your associations, facilitating relationships that will be nurturing of each other, that will be supportive of each other, help developing each other's competence, give them professional development or opportunities, something that you are doing now here, passing on maybe some of this knowledge to the people that you're working with. And then encouraging the heart is the last one. And this is really this kind of recognizing each individual person within your movement and your organization for what they are bringing to the movement. What is their role, showing appreciation, celebrating together, creating rituals within your movements and associations to celebrate small successes, or grieve together when they were failed. So creating this kind of rituals of being together, celebrating together, supporting each other in moments of hardship and difficulties. That's kind of a part of the student leadership challenge as well. Okay, so this was what I had on the leadership and what we know from the literature on the leadership. I'm still encouraging you, please, to put things, questions or comments into the chat. And I'm moving now to the theory of, before I move there, maybe just one moment on the definitions of success. And this is from Interaction Associates that teach nonprofit management. And so I talked before already about your action project, right? And the leaders are usually the ones who kind of inspire shared vision, set the goals together with other people of what should be achieved. But often what do we focus on when we have a particular goal in mind is really on the result, right? On this, what we want to have changed. We want to have Global Student Forum firmly represented as partners within UNESCO, representing the student and youth voices. That's our goal. But what we also have to think about is the process, how the work gets done, how it's going to be, how do we get to that process, kind of really developing the strategy of it, and also how much it will take, right, from the people, and do we have resources that we can do that. So the process, and the other dimension of success is the relationships. So what will trying to get this goal really mean for the relationships within our association, in relationship with our partners? Will it strengthen us? Are there competitive elements that could come out and would weaken us? Will it alienate some of our partners for some reason? Or will it be bringing them together and show their commitment to our organization? So that is another kind of a element in the definitions of success. So not just the goal, not just the end result that we have set ourselves, but really thinking about the process and how we get there, which is obvious. We have to plan the steps how to get there, but also the relationships. And often the part that we do forget is whether people will be worn out, whether we have enough time, attention, whether focusing on that one goal will put all of the other agenda that's on the side. Can we afford that? Should we afford that? Should we prioritize so much? Will people that are involved with it suffer from it because of the time and exhaustion and support? How can we support them? How can we delegate so that somebody doesn't burn out? All of those are the questions of trying to change something and reach a particular goal. Okay, so this is kind of a definition of the success. I just wanted to throw it out of you so that you have it. And now just very quickly, a few things on the student agency. I'm checking my time so that I know that I'm in a good moment still. So this is where kind of my scholarships come in a little bit more. Let me just tell you where I come from. Within the sociology of higher education, there is a massive field which is investigating the way that higher education impacts or affects student outcomes. And this huge, it's the largest field next to the inequalities in access and completion in higher education. But this particular field looks into issues how being a student in university influences your personal development, influences your other outcomes, graduation rates, social mobility, employability. It also how the structures within the colleges, universities define how students engage with learning or in extracurricular activities. But the basic proposition is very simple. It is that the higher education, through its structures and processes, has effects on the students and on their student outcomes, right? And usually this is where the story ends. There is in the literature and the scholarship a huge gap looking in the ways that students also have effects on higher education, also have effects on their own universities, on their own courses, and how they have effects on the national policies, the entire higher education systems, and the transnational and global higher education policies through the work of the representative student associations, through the work of student activists, through the service roles that students often have within their associations where they volunteer or are employed as experts. So this is where I'm trying to come in to validate the input and the contribution and the effects that students have and can have on higher education within their courses, within their schools, within their universities, and broader within their national and transnational higher education systems. So I define it as capabilities. Really, some people, in the social sciences, there's a big debate. It's a kind of a most classical debate between agency and structure, and actors and structures, and how structures define the actor's behavior or constrain it or empower it, and what we have come, how far we have come theoretically, is to recognize that the actors also shape the structures, right? It's not just one directional relationship. And this is what I'm now kind of applying to the context of students and higher education as well. So students have capabilities to influence their environments, either on the institutional or national or transnational level, and their own education pathways. But this kind of agency is predicated or premised, if you want it, on agentic possibilities and agentic orientations. And I'll speak a little bit about this just in a moment. If you just think about agency, the related concept would be empowerment. So empowerment as enactment of agency or improving of these capabilities for students to be co-determining their education space, higher education space. And there are different things that can curb it, but I'll get this into in a moment. So when we think about the sources of agency, sources of those capabilities to influence, to co-shape, to determine, they can be contextual. And this is basically talking about the possibilities for students that they have to influence. So real opportunities to influence things, or positive freedoms for students to act in their space with the purposes to change things or to define things within their environment. Relational sources of agency, this is really the community. This is about the mobilization that some of you have spoken before. That's something that you have worked now on. It's mobilizing other people to be with you, to create a large, powerful, collective agency for change. It's about the broader context and people that are part of that, and the way that they understand student role and student participation. It's about the cultural norms kind of that they have internalized in the way that they see students, and how they ought to be and how they ought to behave as students in that space. And we know that we have different conceptions here. We have some universities accept students as partners, and this is very present in their way of doing and in the way of thinking about it. And there are other contexts that are much more paternalistic, if you want it, or even authoritarian, where students are never considered equals to the faculty or administrators. They're always considered in subordinate position and should not be questioning or should not be criticizing or should not be pushing against those authoritative voices. And that's kind of a cultural imprint. I'll again say a little bit more about it, but I was giving a talk at the Boston College just a week ago, and I was also talking about arguments in favor of student participation in institutional governance, and there were lots of people from the US students, and they're very much on it. Yes, students have a voice, and they have information which is valuable for decision makers. They can legitimize their decisions, all of the classical arguments we use in favor of student participation. And then I said, okay, let's talk about the negative case, right? What would be some of the issues that you can raise to speak the not involved students or not fully involved as a partners? And there was a gentleman who was coming from Asian space, and I'm not sure about the country exactly, but he was saying, well, you know, students don't know that much. How can they be partners? They just don't have the knowledge. And they themselves understand that they are subordinate. And of course, he was coming from the space where it's very much part of the culture, the subordination of the students. The Confucian model would not permit culturally students to question the authority openly, directly. And it's even if you give a lot of power, let's say that we have a magic wand and give those students immense powers, it's still difficult to find that cultural toolkit or cultural frame, right? Whether I am in a position to question, whether I can actually overcome my whole cultural baggage in order to play my role as a partner in the decision-making governance. So cultural context is hugely important, and it kind of tackles this relational aspect, and it tackles, of course, the individual as well. And here in the individual sources of agency, I really talk about, you know, motivations, predispositions, and the will to act. It's also the kind of a self-efficacy, belief in capabilities to exercise control. Sometimes I was writing one of my many pieces on student participation, and I was mentioning the often low turnout in the student elections. And I was kind of discussing with my husband, who is a philosopher, and I was thinking, so how can I, you know, go around this? And he was saying, well, if students do not believe that a student representations, a representative association has a lot of power to influence, they will probably be more reluctant to be, you know, bothering even to vote and cast their voice in those elections, because they do not kind of see the legitimacy or the power of that association. So it's really this kind of it can be the self-efficacy belief. It's important. It's important also for mobilizing people to come to the elections or to be part of the movements if they are not convinced that there is at least some efficacy, some capability to exercise influence within the movement itself. Belief in its own competence, time to engage. I mean, that's one of the issues that I wanted just to kind of throw out to you, whether people have the time to engage when they also have to, not just when they study, but when they also often they have to work while they're studying to supporting themselves, and how to kind of overcome and address those potential inequalities in access to student leadership positions. Okay, so this is this. I'm moving very fast now. Student agentic possibilities deals with this question of having effective opportunities. Everything that is written down in higher education laws or in statutes of your universities that defines student participation in governments, it creates agentic possibilities. And here we talk often about different degrees of involvement. Either students are involved only as a data source, so the university is just surveying students or just does course evaluations, and that's the only kind of a input that they are willing to take into their decisions. Or there is a consultation like here at Harvard, where students don't have formal seats, but the deans would call them to consult them on some new initiative at their will, and usually with the full discretion of not to ignore student concerns if they choose to do so. So it's a very kind of a corporate structure with very little formal agentic possibilities for the students. Or if there's structured dialect, so that they are established regular or frequent channels of consultation between the students and the student representatives and the authority, either the rectors or the leadership of university, or on the ministerial, on the national level with the government, or whether there's partnership. And partnership implies really equal say, equal voting rights in the decisions which they're voted, ability to set agenda, bring issues onto agenda, being properly informed, have access to all of the documents that other people have, so that students can fully and competently take part in the decisions. Okay, so agentic publicity, I have one more, so bear with me, and there we'll end this part of the lesson. And this one is about agentic motivations. Again, looking into these predispositions to act. There's a lot of theory here, but it is really about the efficacy, the sense of the efficacy as student judgment or belief in that they have capabilities to exercise some degree of control, some degree of influence within the space that they are occupying. And here really depends as well on the kind of what I want to highlight as well is often motivations will depend as well on the student's sense of belonging, whether they to this community, to your organizations, or kind of and seeing the role of your organizations in that community. If they have the sense of the belonging, I argue they might be willing to do more in order to better that community, in order to improve the community for everybody. But again, inequalities in access to the student leadership positions due to other occupations, and also the importance of taking care of student leaders. This is something that they don't burn out, that they are not at risk, that they are supported, that at least the student associations among themselves support each other. So this is what I have from my side. And going straight into the issue of student representation. Few definitions first. Let me just open it up for you so that you will be seeing it properly. Student representation. First, the kind of basic definition, the way that I usually define student representative associations: unions, councils, guilds, bodies, parliaments, governments, having a primary aim to represent and defend the interest of the collective student body, so of everybody. So be inclusive, disabled students, postgraduate students, if they don't have a separate structure. So your associations organize student interests. They aggregate student interests in the sense of pulling the grievances, making them into the position papers in order to influence, and they intermediate student interests, which means that from these positions you channel them into towards decision makers, either the university rectors or on the national level. You also provide services for students, mental health support if it's not provided, tutoring, counseling, and you organize student activities. So this is how we researchers try to look and kind of think about the student representative associations. And of course that student representative associations are part of a multi-level governance of education and operate at different levels of governance within the departments or study programs, within the schools, within the entire university, consisting of many faculties or schools, on the national or regional level in the federal systems, and on the transnational level, as we have with the regional federations, the ASU, the ESU, Commonwealth Student Association, the UCLAE for Latin America, Caribbean Student Union, and so on, and now with the Global Student Forum, right? So this is the kind of a basic definition. And I'm whizzing very quickly. There are certain differences that researchers point out when we think about student representation and when we think about student activism. There is agreement that both representation and activism are two interlinked but yet distinct facets of student politics. Okay, so if student politics are all activities, political activities can be directed towards the changes and towards the kind of a representation of student interests, we would think about student representation being much more about advocacy, the kind of organized structures that are put together, that come together with the purpose of representing student interest, and that they kind of typically seek these formal institutional forms of influencing. That doesn't mean that student representative associations do not resort to student activism when needed, or other forms of conflictual or contentious political action, but it's really kind of the main form is kind of the default is that you start off that you will be trying to collect the student interest and influences. So this is what is in the literature. Maybe you see it differently, but I'm giving you how it has been so far represented. The student activism is part of the contentious mode of political action. It's deals with mobilization in protest or other social movements. It tackles often a particular grievance that students or other groups are experiencing. It often it can be on higher education issues, or it can be on a broader society, of broader societal relevance. And the organization is typically looser, right? They're no formal institutionalized structures that support it, but it's a kind of loose, more network-like, less hierarchical or non-hierarchical, and not institutionalized in the sense of having secretariat and things like that. So this is how we kind of try as researchers distinguish between both. And the student movement would be kind of a broad term for the development of collective organizations of students representing student interest, student campaigns. I think it in a way encompasses both of them. I don't think we have, and even now that we have CHEC in our project, I think we kind of speak of both associations and the movements to try to validate that differences in institutionalization that we see across different countries and different institutions. But again, these terms are up for debate and critique, so please don't hold back. But this is kind of the way that we think student politics, representation, activism, interlinked, but still kind of a conceptually distinct. One much more advocacy, more formally organized, institutionalized. The other one much more contentious political action, protest, sit-ins, boycotts, and less not institutionalized, but more network-like, movement-like, right? So from there, I'll go to talk about first representation in national politics, and tackle two things: the types of national level student associations we see, and then the types of systems of student representation and the system of student intermediation we see. I know this is a mouthful. This is all theory behind your life, your work, and trying to do what social sciences do, trying to make some kind of a more, kind of a simplify or explain the very complex reality. And of course, those explanations are never perfect, and we need to find better ways to explain them. But this is at least the starting point. So this is the typology of national student associations I have developed many years ago, and hoping that through CHEG we revisit it, hopefully develop it or dismantle it completely. We'll see where it gets us. But I distinguish between two types of national student associations. One are that are more social movement-like, or a social movement organization, and the other one that are more interest group like, or more kind of a trade union like. And the distinction is in organizational structure, internal resources, political agenda, mode of action, and outputs. Those were the kind of key indicators for differentiating. The social movement like is more network like, loosely integrated. The other one is more hierarchical ordered, has strong institutions, has that are developed and has a kind of a centralized coordination. There is an executive committee or the presidency, and then there are different subgroups or working groups, and there is an assembly, and often within its structures, different working groups are functionally differentiated. So somebody is social affairs, the other one is corruption, the third one is student rights, etc., academic issues. Whereas in network, in the social movement organizations, they might be, one issue might be kind of a more encompassing, or this kind of functional differentiation, at least structurally, would not be so visible. Differences in internal resources, whether the funding, how secure the funding is or not, whether it has professional administration, secretariat or not. Again, the difference between movement and organization. Political agenda. Here I'm not completely certain, because there's lots of fluctuations, but the movement, at least that's what I argued back in the days, was much more transversal in the broad political agenda, whereas the interest group ones were more focused on the substance of higher education, but could have also dealt with broader political issues. And I know that in many student associations, that is a debate, right? Are we focusing on higher ed issues only, or are we also speaking about other political issues as well? Again, think about it, this was done for the context mostly for Europe, so it might be different in other spaces. So please do put into the chat if it doesn't work for you. I know that our colleagues from Italy that are working on the CHEG project have added this kind of syndicate type, kind of an in-between that works in France, and also has some reflections in Italy, and that's very interesting, kind of a more in between, and that would be something where we can add this and change and revisit this model as well. Outputs is also movement, like it's a mobilization capacity, how much you can actually mobilize and how many people you can mobilize for the grievance in the political action. Whereas in the outputs in the interest group are much more being representative, expertise, information, implementation capacity if you're working on projects that were commissioned by the university or by the government or somebody else. Again, so this kind of mode of action, non-institutional forms of claim making, we call it fancy in the literature. Protest, boycott campaigns, more typical for the social movement organizations, lobbying, political advocacy, services, doing projects, more typical for more interest group like student associations. Again, remember, ideal types. Your reality is somewhere in between, but we, for the purposes of a social science kind of research, try to delineate it in order to bring some clarity on a very complex social reality. Moving from here on is the typology of the national systems of student representation. This question poses, who is there in the national political space representing students? And what are their relationships to the government? Okay. Here I'm listing only two, but there should be really three if we look at globally. Again, because I was looking here only on the European context at the time. One is the neo-corporatist model of a state-student relationship, if you it usually says that there's a limited number of student associations representing students within that national space. And if they are more than one, they would be functionally differentiated or territorially differentiated. I'm thinking Finland, they would be SUL representing universities, and they would be SAMOK representing other types of higher education institutions, universities of applied sciences, polytechnics, okay? So functional differentiation. Or maybe they would be two, one representing undergraduate students across all of the public universities, one representing postgraduate students. Again, limited number of intermediate associations. That is different from the pluralist model, where you have many. Many, it can be either those that are active on the institutional level, because there's no national platform, and those on the institutional level compete for monopoly of student representation against each other, or sometimes cooperate on some issues, but there's not one single one. No one single association has this kind of a hierarchical control over the others, right? So there's not a clear hierarchy. It gets complicated when you have kind of a youth council structure that is also populating the domain of higher education, and thus advocacy on the issues of higher education. And then you are there as a student representative platform with other types of youth associations, and it's a question who does what, and whether it's a more neo-corporatist or pluralist system. Probably more neo-corporatist, but we know that the hierarchy then starts with the council, with the national council rather than with the national student union. One that I have not mentioned here is the corporatist structure, and I have not mentioned it because it's typical for authoritarian countries, for non-democratic countries, where there is typically one corporatist would mean there's one or two functionally differentiated student associations, but they are not independent. They're effectively set up by the government to be a prolonged hand of the bureaucracy, controlled directly or indirectly by the government, and it's to represent student voice and student interest in the national political relations. But it's not a independent autonomous one, right? So this is the kind of a main difference with a neo-corporatist, which presumes that national level student representative association is going to be democratic, run by the students, independent in its decision making, not interfered with from the government in any way. And then the second point is about relationship to the state, and whether the state recognizes student associations or not. Oh, I just realized I'll have to take a quick break. Just take a quick break because I need to move to another space. I got, so give me a second and you can read this, but I'm going to just for a moment move. I'm back, everybody. Sorry about this, but I had to change my space because my space got occupied somewhere else. So I was going big into the discussion of the typology before of the systems of student representation. And the second question was really about the recognition by the state, okay? And in the neo-corporatist, it would typically, student representative association would have formally or informally that monopoly of the representation of the students, and would either be approved or kind of affirmed by the state or not. Whereas in the pluralist one, no association is giving that monopoly. And usually what the government does is plays divide et impera, right? Divide and conquer, and kind of maybe benefit or capitalize on the competitiveness between them, not to kind of have one single association stand out. And in our current conversations with the Global Student Forum, there's some elements of that as well, right? Keeping lots of them, very different interests, rather than to have one powerful, united voice that can really challenge the authority, right? So I'm moving here to the next one. And this is the question of the models of student intermediation. And intermediation really means what are the existing structures or processes of how on national level the student representatives speak to the government or are involved in the government decision making. And there are two models. Either they're formalized, so these relational structures, as we call them, are formalized, are written in higher education laws. So there is a kind of a clear structure set up for student voice, such as the student council on the national level that is a partner or speaks into the political process, or they're informal. And informal would mean that the connections or context communication by the student leaders and the government takes place ad hoc on a needs basis when somebody is pushing, either the students or where the government says, okay, maybe we should have ask students about this if we are preparing a new legislation, or when students are protesting in front of the door and the minister says, oh, maybe I should talk to them so they don't trash the entire parliament. So it's a question about whether really student representation on the national level is conceived as a decisive co-actor, has some formal ways of influencing public policies, either through a particular body designated for them, or either through the particular channels, kind of seats in the government bodies, or it works as an external pressure and on an informal basis or ad hoc basis tries to represent the interests. So this is what I have on the national level. Very similar things on the institutional, but I'll try to be much quicker here because I have less. It's the different types of institution, union type, council type, depending whether they have independent legal entity or they're integrated into institutional governance. And I know that one of you is looking into that, right? How to gain that independence. It's about the organizational resources, paid staff, or having a secretariat, not. It is about what kind of a membership you have. Is it automatic? Is it voluntary? It's about the funding streams that support the work of your associations on that level. It is about the political agenda. It is about the type of mode of action that you would usually do. So this is the kind of a local level, institutional level distinction. It comes also the distinction about what kind of role students have in the institutional governance of higher education institutions, whether it's a kind of model of co-determination, Mitbestimmung, they say it from the, it's used in the Germanic context, or is it a consultation? And again, the co-determination would mean that there is a seat for students, that students have a formal voting rights in kind of a crucial governing bodies of the institution, whereas in the consultation, it would mean that it's all informal, need-based, like the Harvard case that I have mentioned earlier, okay? So where students don't have a proper seat, but they're invited at the discretion and the will of the administrators. So this is, I'm almost done. Just mentioning two more and then we'll talk about it, okay? So autonomy and the legitimacy. When we think about the autonomy of representative student associations, we think about decision-making competences, so ability to act of those representative student associations, be that on institutional or national level, and we think about their independence, right? Freedom from constraints. And in the ability to act, it's usually policy autonomy. Do you have fully autonomy to decide on own political and professional agenda? It is a governance autonomy. Do you have fully ability to decide on internal structures and processes? It is about managerial autonomy. Do you have discretion over financial matters, how you spend money, where you get income, hiring your own people and personnel if you have secretariats and other resources like facilities or not? And in the independence, we think about legal autonomy. What is the legal status of your associations? Are you a legal independent entity, a non-profit association, or are you a branch within somebody else, within your institution or something else? Financial autonomy, dependency on funding from the government or from the institution that hosts you. Do you have access to external funding? Can you apply for external funding? What is your membership fee regime? Does it secure your basic funding, and do you have a full discretion of that money or not? And then it's about symbolic autonomy, kind of a dependency on symbolic capital or close ties to others to really fully operate. Political parties, trade unions, and how completely independent are you from them, and how strongly you need them in order to really pursue your agenda. So this is, and the very last slide, and this is there ended the lecture, is about the legitimacy of student representative association. And here we think, as many of you know and have mentioned already as part of your project, is internal legitimacy and external legitimacy. Let me just give you the full definition that we use it in the scholarship. So internal legitimacy is usually defined as student associations' worthiness to be recognized as a representative structure of students by the students themselves, right? By your constituency. So it's, and what it really refers to, it's whether your student, your constituency, perceives you as being able to represent them effectively and truthfully and inclusively, right, of the variety of interests, and foster student interest vis-a-vis the institution leadership, the public authorities, other stakeholders, right? And some of the criteria for the internal legitimacy are the good governance, no corruption. We have a project here on corruption. It is about democratic, structural, and procedural issues. So the democratic structures, democratic procedures, openness to all students, being really inclusive of the entire student body that they claim to represent, symbolic autonomy, so perceived as being autonomous rather than a puppet of somebody, the government or political party or trade union or the institution, the expertise that it is, and the trustworthiness of the student representatives, right? So this is for the internal legitimacy. For the external one, it's similar issues. It's about student associations' perceived worthiness to be recognized as a representative structure of the students by the authority that is trying, and partners, other stakeholders that is trying to influence. And here often what is the focus is really perceived ability to competently engage in decision processes, but also representational capital, right? Is this really a representative voice of the students? So criteria for looking is, it is representativity, it is good governance, it is the expertise that students can bring into the decision-making processes within institutions or the policies, it is professionalism, it is constructivism. So that would be something, that would be what would be giving I think with this, I have theories change, but we don't need to look into this, or maybe just quickly, give me just one moment and then I open it up for the discussion, okay? Theory is change. What we usually look at when we look into theories of change, we're looking what is changing. Is something changing in the organizational culture of your associations, the structures, the formal structures, the political agenda? We are looking at the changes that are happening within those systems of representation, either on institutional or the national level. Who is representing students? What are the formal channels? What are the relationships with the authorities? We're looking into the actual effects that students have had, whether they had whether they raised the attention they wanted to raise, whether they have prevented some bad policy action or decision, things like that. And there are different kind of theoretical frameworks of how to go about it. And herewith, I have stopped with a little bit, this is where it stops the lecture. And I would like to, for the next 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, just until we end, either get feedback, comments, or at least, and this is where I want your voices, not just chat voices, but really voices, or at least something from what you have heard today that resonates with you in some way. Okay, so I'm going to give you again a moment, maybe actually 3 minutes this time, with some music on, where I'm going to be asked you, because there is a music teacher in my study right now with my child, so let me give you some music, but not there. You don't want to hear that music, trust me. So I'm going to give you something else for your reflection on things that you might, that resonated with you today. It can be also kind of a push back on what you have heard, something that works differently in your context. But let me just find some music, and then we will, my usual one, those that have heard me speak before, I'm looking for my Andrew Bird, fingerling, something uplifting. And as long as the music is playing, about 3 minutes, we can have a reflection and then we'll talk about it.